She worked for 16 hours without a single word of complaint. But she only asked for leftovers. Her boss followed her home, and what he saw shocked him to tears. She was feeding hundreds of people, but she was going home hungry. Post in the comments, where are you watching from? In the hectic pulse of an ever-buzzing restaurant on the edge of the city, where the relentless clatter of pots and sizzling pans was the daily rhythm of survival, worked a woman named Sofia. Every day as dawn crept over the skyline, Sofia would rise long before the city stirred awake. In her modest apartment, worn but filled with the gentle warmth of family photographs and frayed mementos, she prepared herself mentally for the grueling day ahead. Despite her tired eyes and the ache in her bones, she moved with a quiet determination. A determination born from years of sacrifice and an unwavering devotion to the family that depended on her. Sofia's day was one of ceaseless motion. For 16 hours, she toiled behind the scenes at the bustling restaurant, where orders piled high and the pressure of the kitchen swirled like a never-ending storm. She was known to her colleagues as the workhorse of the kitchen, a woman who worked tirelessly without complaint, greeting each new challenge with a calm smile and a steadfast resolve. Whether it was preparing hundreds of meals, juggling multiple tasks at once, or staying late to cover for absent coworkers, Sofia never once asked for thanks, a raise, or even a brief moment of relief. Her only request, politely repeated time and again as the shift wound down, was this: "Just the leftovers, please." It was a simple request, one that most would dismiss without a second thought. Yet, for Sofia, those extra scraps represented far more than a few extra bites at the end of a shift. They were a lifeline. Every extra morsel of food she received was carefully stashed away in her battered lunchbox, destined not for indulgence but for her family's dinner table. Back at her small apartment, where the nights were as long as her workdays, that single ration of leftover food enabled her to stretch meager resources and provide for the children and the aging parents living under her roof. In a world where many of her co-workers clamored for recognition, promotions, or even a minor perk, Sofia's humble request was a quiet testament to her selflessness, a choice to sacrifice her own well-being for the sake of the ones she loved most. Day after day, as the restaurant's patrons savored their perfectly plated dishes and the chefs celebrated fleeting compliments, Sofia made her silent pilgrimage from the busy kitchen to the dimming counter, where the manager would discreetly slide the day's remaining food into a paper bag. The leftovers were often far from lavish: a cold sandwich, a modest portion of soup, a few starchy sides. But in Sofia's eyes, they were a symbol of her unending contribution. They were proof that she was there, giving everything she had while the world around her buzzed with energy and ambition. Unlike many who sought to advance by clambering up the corporate ladder, Sofia never voiced a desire for more than what was necessary to keep her family fed and her home warm. Her co-workers noticed her quiet endurance but never pride. There was an unspoken respect, mixed perhaps with pity, for the woman who never allowed herself the luxury of rest. Behind her unyielding exterior, however, lay a tumult of emotions. Outside the gleam and grit of the restaurant's demands, Sofia's heart ached. The long working hours and ceaseless responsibilities left little time for laughter, and even less for personal dreams. Yet, every sacrifice she made was steeped in love. Every extra minute logged behind the counter was a silent promise to her family that they would never go hungry. Despite the heavy toll on her body and spirit, she wore her exhaustion as a badge of honor, a testament to her commitment in a world that often overlooked the quiet warriors among us. For years, Sofia had quietly borne the burden of her labor. She had grown accustomed to the unchanging cadence of her life, an endless cycle of shifting from the frenetic pace of the restaurant to the quiet desolation of her small apartment, where she spent her scarce moments of rest. Even when opportunities for advancement arose, she would politely decline, knowing that a higher salary might come with longer hours or more responsibilities that would further erode the little time she had for herself and her family. Instead, she chose the familiar hardship, a hard-fought stability that, while grueling, allowed her to keep a sliver of humanity in her daily existence. It was this very simplicity, a single, unassuming request for leftovers, that began to capture the notice of someone who rarely stepped foot into the humble corners of the restaurant floor. Across the polished reception area and behind a desk that buzzed with the day's business, the company's CEO, Jonathan Hartley, had been monitoring operations. Jonathan was a man accustomed to boardrooms and high-level strategy sessions, where every decision was weighed in terms of profit margins and market share. Yet, he also prided himself on knowing his company's pulse. When his assistant casually mentioned that one of the kitchen staff always requested nothing more than the remnants of the day's meals, Jonathan's curiosity was piqued. What seemed like a trivial gesture became an enigma worthy of further attention. After all, why would someone who toiled so relentlessly for 16 hours expect only leftovers? That quiet, repetitive request gnawed at Jonathan. In the polished corridors of corporate decision-making, where workers were often reduced to mere numbers, such a humble act resonated like a whisper from a forgotten world, a world where human dignity and sacrifice could no longer be safely concealed behind spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Little did anyone know that this gentle, almost invisible act of modesty would soon set in motion a chain of events challenging the very core of the company's culture. But for now, only the subtle spark of change had been lit. Its glow reflected softly in the battered lunchbox and in the tired but determined eyes of Sofia. And so, as another long, relentless day at the restaurant drew to a close, Sofia walked away with her small bag of leftovers clutched close to her heart. A quiet symbol of the sacrifices made every day without fanfare or complaint, and a sign that, sometimes, the smallest voices are the ones that resonate the loudest in the halls of power. That evening, as the last clatter of dishes faded from the bustling restaurant and the echoes of a long, grueling shift dissolved into silence, Jonathan Hartley, the company's CEO, found his thoughts haunted by one seemingly insignificant detail: Sofia's humble request for nothing more than the leftover food. It was a request so simple, so easily dismissed in the din of daily business, yet it reverberated deep within him. How could a woman who labored tirelessly for 16 hours a day, who infallibly poured her heart and soul into her work, settle for scraps when she, undoubtedly, deserved something far more? Unable to shake off the nagging curiosity, Jonathan spent the next few hours in his spacious corporate office, poring over reports and reviewing internal memos about shift schedules and employee productivity. But every statistic, every data point, only accentuated the anomaly of Sofia's modest request. Here was a dedicated worker who never asked for a raise, never complained of burnout, and yet, at the end of each harrowing day, her sole plea was for the remnants of the day's meals. It was as if she had resigned herself to a life of endless sacrifice. Without fully understanding why, Jonathan felt a growing compulsion to discover more about this remarkable employee. At the stroke of midnight, driven by a blend of professional responsibility and a sudden personal awakening, Jonathan made a decision. It might seem unorthodox for a CEO of his stature, entrenched in boardroom protocol and profit margins, to step beyond the neat confines of his office. Yet something about Sofia's quiet dignity, her unassuming nature, and the bittersweet trace of hardship in her daily ritual stirred him to act. He decided he would follow Sofia after her shift and try, discreetly and privately, to uncover the truth behind those leftover requests. Under the cloak of darkness and while the city outside slumbered, Jonathan left the corporate building in his sleek sedan. The drive to the restaurant was quiet. Each mile ticked by as he wrestled with a medley of thoughts and questions. What are the true conditions of her life? Why does someone who pours so much of herself into her job only ever ask for the scraps? These questions looped endlessly in his mind. He arrived at the restaurant, a vibrant, noisy hub by day, that now stood silent and reflective in the pale glow of streetlights. With a careful, almost hesitant resolve, he circled around to the back exit where employees often departed after closing time. Peering discreetly from his car, Jonathan caught sight of Sofia emerging into the cool night. Though exhausted, her shoulders slumped and her pace languid after a 16-hour marathon, there was a quiet strength in her gait. Clutching a worn-out bag containing the leftover food, she made her way to a modest building not far from the restaurant. Jonathan's pulse quickened as he followed at a respectful distance, aware that what he was about to witness might alter his understanding of life at his company forever. From his vantage point across a dimly lit street, Jonathan observed Sofia as she climbed a narrow staircase leading to a rundown apartment complex. The building, its facade weathered and windows dimly lit, stood in stark contrast to the modern, polished image of the restaurant where she toiled by day. Even from afar, hints of hardship were evident. A flickering neon sign overhead, stained curtains, and an atmosphere of quiet resignation that exuded from its very walls. Jonathan parked his car at a discreet distance, hidden from prying eyes. Through the glass of his vehicle, he watched as Sofia ascended the stairs, her face set in an expression that belied the fatigue of the day. When she reached her modest apartment door, she paused for just a fleeting moment, perhaps a silent exhale, a brief gathering of her resolve, then unlocked it and stepped inside. The camera of his mind zoomed in on the details that now emerged. The sparse, dimly lit hallway of the apartment. A small table adorned with a single bowl of cereal and a half-filled glass of water. A worn sofa and a collection of faded family photographs pinned to a corkboard. There was nothing lavish here, only the stark realities of hard living. From the insights he gathered in that quiet moment, Jonathan began to piece together a narrative that was both humbling and heartbreaking. It appeared that Sofia's unassuming request for leftovers was not just a quirky habit or a misplaced sense of gratitude. Instead, it was a silent cry for help, a reflection of personal sacrifice made with little hope for reprieve. The modest apartment, the sparse dinner awaits her family, and the evidence of tight budgeting scattered among everyday items suggested a life in which every resource was stretched to its limit. Here, in the private sphere away from the bright lights of the restaurant, the full weight of her sacrifices became painfully evident. Jonathan watched, transfixed, as Sofia slipped into a cramped living room where two small children, their eyes heavy with sleep yet filled with quiet resilience, sat on the floor near a low table. An elderly man, likely a parent or guardian, nodded off in a well-worn armchair. The scene was emblematic. Despite her long, exhausting hours not only at work, but in keeping a fragile household afloat, Sofia's devotion to her family was unwavering. She quietly set about her evening routine, preparing what little meal she could with the extras, sorting meager bills, and perhaps, in small, unspoken ways, trying to patch together a semblance of stability in a life that offered very little comfort. In that brief yet searing observation, Jonathan felt a profound shift in his understanding. Here was an employee whose dedication stretched far beyond the boundaries of her job description. Her sacrifices were not a byproduct of ambition or careerism. They were born out of necessity, love, and the harsh reality that she had no other choice. Jonathan's heart clenched as he realized how many hardworking individuals like Sofia might be silently enduring similar hardships, unnoticed and unappreciated by a corporate structure more focused on spreadsheets and profit margins than on people. Overwhelmed by the quiet tragedy unfolding before him, Jonathan remained in his car for several long, heavy minutes. He wrestled with guilt, the realization that, despite his best intentions to innovate and succeed, his company had neglected the welfare of those who built its foundation from the ground up. He promised himself that he would not allow this revelation to fade into a momentary regret. Instead, it would catalyze a deeper commitment to change, a transformation in how employees were valued, treated, and supported. By the time the first light of dawn began to disperse the darkness, Jonathan finally started his car and drove back toward the headquarters, his mind awash in the images of Sofia's modest home life. What he had witnessed was not just a glimpse into the life of a single employee. It was a mirror reflecting the neglected underbelly of corporate excess and indifference. He knew that the simple, repeated request for leftovers was a tangible sign of a much larger problem, one in which the true cost of business success was measured in the sacrifices of its most vulnerable workers. Sitting in his office later that morning, Jonathan's resolve crystallized. He resolved to launch an internal investigation into employee working conditions and to personally ensure that the company's policies were revised to support those who, like Sofia, had been left struggling in the shadows of relentless corporate ambition. This private mission would soon evolve into a public commitment, a shift in company culture that would prioritize people over profit and human dignity over margins. That single, unassuming request had opened his eyes to a hidden world of daily sacrifices. Sofia's quiet endurance, Her selfless dedication to her family despite earning so little would now serve as the catalyst for a long-overdue transformation. Jonathan's heart and mind were set aflame by the promise of change. A promise that he intended to keep, not only for Sofia but for every single individual who had ever been marginalized by an indifferent corporate machine. From the quiet of his car, Jonathan Hartley continued to watch as the dim glow of streetlights revealed more of the world that Sofia called home. The further he observed, the more each detail of her modest life deeply unsettled him. He saw Sofia, exhausted yet determined, unlock the door of a time-worn apartment building. The exterior of the building was unremarkable. A faded brick facade, a few cracked windows, and peeling paint that told the story of economic neglect. Yet for Jonathan, every imperfection was a testament to a life that had been sacrificed in silence. Once inside, the narrow corridor was barely illuminated by a single, flickering overhead light. He could see, through a half-open door, a small living area that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. The room was sparse. A sagging couch covered with a threadbare blanket, a battered coffee table that held a few well-worn books and a vase with wilted flowers, and a kitchenette little more than a compact counter with a hot plate. It was not the picture of comfort or luxury but one of quiet endurance. The scattered belongings hinted at a constant battle to make ends meet. Every item appeared cherished yet clearly overused. Jonathan watched as Sofia entered a cramped bedroom, where the soft murmur of hushed voices indicated that she was not alone. Peeking through the doorway, he noted a delicate, bittersweet scene. Two small children, their faces still carrying the innocence of sleep, huddled under a makeshift quilt on a faded mattress. An elderly man, whom Jonathan later pieced together must be her aging father, dozed in a worn-out armchair, a newspaper folded at his side. This small household, illuminated by the soft light of a single lamp, bore the marks of daily hardship. The walls, adorned with a few cherished family photographs and handmade art projects, suggested that love had always been the one constant amid their struggles. As Jonathan continued his silent vigil, he saw Sofia begin her evening ritual with quiet resolve. After a long, grueling day at the restaurant, she prepared her meager dinner with the extra food that had been dismissed by others as nothing more than leftovers. In her modest kitchen, every motion was deliberate. A careful unwrapping of a plastic container, the measured pouring of a simple broth into a chipped bowl, and the gentle stirring of a sparse mix of vegetables that, despite its simple appearance, was prepared with evident care and love. Her actions, though routine, resonated with a quiet dignity. There was no bitterness in her demeanor, only a steadfast commitment to ensuring that the little she had was enough to sustain her family through another day. Jonathan felt his pulse quicken as he took in the scene. Here was a woman who, despite the relentless demands of a 16-hour workday that left her physically spent, never once asked for more than just the leftovers. A small, seemingly insignificant request that now spoke of deep-rooted sacrifice and a life defined by endless responsibility. Every aspect of her home, from the worn-out furnishings to the carefully conserved food, painted a picture of a person who had long ago sacrificed her own comfort for the sake of those she loved. It was not that Sofia was ungrateful or resigned. Rather, she had long internalized that she could never expect more than what little the world had offered her. This, Jonathan understood, was not a choice made lightly. It was a necessity born from years of relentless labor and the crushing weight of financial obligations. A quiet, unseen struggle that had forced her to relinquish even the simplest pleasures that others took for granted. The sight of her family's humble living conditions struck Jonathan with a force that was both shocking and humbling. Here, behind the bright facade of the popular restaurant where Sofia's work was celebrated in fleeting moments, lay a stark reality of neglect. A stark reality born of corporate apathy. Jonathan's mind raced as he realized that while the company prided itself on serving high-quality meals and maintaining a bustling, modern environment, it had completely overlooked the human cost behind the scenes. Employees like Sofia, whose lives were woven with persistence and self-sacrifice, had been largely invisible to the upper echelons of management. Their struggles were never discussed in boardrooms, never measured in profit margins. Yet they were the backbone of a company that thrived on their unspoken resilience. As he sat there in his car, metaphorically and literally parked on the fringes of two very different worlds, the world of corporate success and the hidden realm of everyday sacrifice. Jonathan felt a deep stirring of responsibility. The humble surroundings of Sofia's home were a harsh, candid indictment of the status quo. It was clear that the reasons behind her modest request for leftovers were far more profound than mere thriftiness. Instead, they were born out of a painful need. A need to protect her family in a world where every resource was stretched to its limits, where every extra dime or morsel of food was a testament to sacrifices made with quiet tears at night. In that quiet, brooding moment before dawn, Jonathan realized the truth. The company's policies, structured around profit and productivity, had blinded him and his colleagues to the realities faced by those at the very heart of the operation. The dignity of its workers, especially those who worked the grueling hours beneath the bright lights of the restaurant, had been sacrificed at the altar of efficiency and bottom-line results. Sofia's life was the embodiment of this heart-wrenching truth, that while the company shined outwardly as a model of success and modernity, its foundation was trembling under the weight of unaddressed human need. Jonathan's thoughts turned to the countless other employees who, like Sofia, had silently endured their burdens without complaint. The realization ignited a spark of determination within him, one that promised not only to rethink the company's practices, but to fundamentally transform its culture. He knew that when a person is forced to sacrifice basic dignity for the survival of their loved ones, it is reflective of a system utterly out of balance. This was the moment when he resolved to make a change that would ensure that no employee would ever feel so invisible, so exploited, and so desperately alone again. As the early light started to creep through the window of his car, Jonathan felt the weight of responsibility settle on him like a mantle. Sofia's silent strength and the stark reality of her life had opened his eyes to a truth he could no longer ignore. He understood now, more than ever, that if his company was to truly prosper, it must begin by honoring the humanity of every worker, starting with those who, like Sofia, had so quietly borne the cost of success. In the quiet pre-dawn hours that followed Sofia's arrival at her modest apartment, the harsh reality of her home life revealed itself in every crevice and shadow. Although the relentless clamor of the restaurant had faded into a distant echo behind her, a new kind of battle awaited her. A battle fought not on gleaming kitchen floors or among bustling dining tables, but within the four-worn walls of her small dwelling. Here, the sacrifices she made on the job spilled over into every moment of her life, and each sacrifice bore its own hidden cost. Inside her cramped apartment, simplicity and struggle coexisted in a fragile equilibrium. The walls, once painted a hopeful cream, were now faded by the unyielding glare of a single, sputtering bulb overhead. The living space was sparse. A threadbare sofa held together by years of wear, a rickety table that struggled to support a pile of unpaid bills, and a few handcrafted trinkets that whispered of happier times. Family photographs, frayed at the edges, adorned a corkboard by the door, a silent chronicle of what once was, and a reminder of dreams that had been set aside for the sake of survival. Sofia's day had not ended when she left the restaurant. Instead, it morphed into a relentless cycle of tending to the fragile needs of her family. In the tiny kitchen, a space that doubled as a dining room, she carefully unpacked the leftovers from the day. These remnants, modest slices of bread or a bowl of cold stew, were her lifeline. Yet even as she reheated these scarce morsels on a small, outdated hot plate, her mind was already occupied with the myriad challenges that would greet her with the rising sun. Her family, the heart of her relentless persistence, depended entirely on her. Across the narrow corridor, in a room where the wallpaper peeled like a secret from the past, two small children stirred from restless sleep. Their eyes, still heavy with dreams of a better tomorrow, reflected both innocent hope and deep-seated fatigue. They would soon be roused by the soft, weary hum of their mother, one who had long since learned to manage their needs with little more than strength of will and an unbreakable sense of duty. In another corner of the room sat an elderly man, likely her father or a cherished relative, whose slow, labored breath spoke of age and hardship. His presence was both a comfort and a reminder. Every member of this fragile household had sacrificed something to be here, enduring life's relentless march with a courage that went unnoticed by the rest of the world. Sofia's struggle was more than just physical exhaustion. It was a daily test of emotional fortitude. Each evening, after her shift ended at the restaurant and when most would finally allow themselves a moment of respite, she immersed herself in the quiet duty of ensuring her family's survival. She meticulously set aside every scrap of food, not because she wished to be frugal, but because it was the only way she could stretch each hard-earned cent. Every cracked bowl and worn spoon became symbols of her sacrifice, echoing the quiet pain of a woman who had long understood that to provide for those she loved was to forsake her own fleeting moments of comfort. As she moved about her cramped space, tending to household tasks under the watchful eyes of her sleeping children, Sofia's inner turmoil was palpable. There was no pride in her deprivation, only a deep, unspoken sorrow that weighed on her shoulders. The solitude of her struggles contrasted starkly with how the world perceived her. At work, she was the epitome of diligence and dedication, a silent pillar who never asked for more than was minimally required. Yet here, behind the peeling paint and under the flickering light of an overburdened lamp, the cost of her endless commitment lay bare in every frayed cushion and every half-whispered lullaby to her children. In those quiet hours, a potent cocktail of fatigue, love, and unyielding responsibility defined her existence. Sofia never complained. She never sought out extra comforts or begged for recognition. Instead, she delivered what she could: a few heartbeats of extra warmth, a fraction of an extra meal, and silently bore the burden of her sacrifices, believing that her familial duty was greater than any personal desire for rest or reward. Each morsel of food set aside was a small act of defiance against a system that paid little attention to its laborers. It was her subtle way of saying, "I am here, I endure, I give all, even when it means I have nothing left for myself." As the night wore on and the first hints of dawn glimmered through a cracked window, Jonathan Hartley, hidden in his car, mind still reeling from his earlier observation, could not help but feel an overwhelming sense of heartbreak. The picture of Sofia's humble existence, punctuated by the struggle to balance her family's needs with the unyielding demands of her job, was a stark, uncompromising indictment of the company's neglect. It was a life built on sacrificial routines and quiet, daily wars that would never be acknowledged by those ensconced in the corporate towers miles away. For Jonathan, witnessing this silent suffering had shifted something deep within him. He saw now that the leftovers she collected each day were not evidence of modesty or gratitude, but of a calculated acceptance of inequality. A submission to a system that profited off her unyielding toil while leaving her with scraps. In that moment, as the dim light gradually gave way to the soft glow of morning, a seed of determination was planted in his heart. He vowed that not a single day would pass without him reevaluating the entrenched policies of his company. It was clear, the life of every worker, from the high-flying executives to the quiet souls in the kitchens, deserved not only acknowledgement but the dignity of proper care and respectful treatment. And so, against the quiet backdrop of a struggling household, the silent battle waged by Sofia became a clarion call for change, one that would soon resonate from the heart of the boardroom to the very soul of the company. Her daily sacrifices, etched in the worn scars of her modest home, would no longer be invisible. They would ignite a transformation in how people were valued, ensuring that the strength of commitment was met with the compassion and respect that every employee deserved. Later that morning, still shaken by the vivid images of Sofia's modest home and the raw, unvarnished reality of her daily struggles, Jonathan Hartley returned to his corporate headquarters with a heavy yet determined heart. As the CEO of a thriving restaurant chain, he had spent years immersed in quarterly reports and profit forecasts, numbers that testified to success while masking the silent hardships of those who made it possible. But now, those sterile spreadsheets paled in comparison to the stark portrait of human sacrifice he had witnessed the previous night. In the quiet solitude of his expansive glass-walled office, Jonathan began to reassess everything he thought he knew about the company's work culture. Sitting at his sleek mahogany desk, Jonathan meticulously reviewed the observations he had documented in the long hours of that uneasy night. He replayed in his mind the scene of Sofia's tired eyes as she gently closed the creaking door of her rundown apartment, the sparse furnishings that testified to a life of relentless poverty despite her essential contributions, and the bittersweet ritual of reclaiming the day's leftovers. The images were seared into his memory, a reminder that the company's success was built on the backs of employees, who often went unnoticed and unappreciated. With every glance at his meticulously organized files, his sense of guilt grew. These numbers and profits were high, but they were achieved at a terrible human cost. Feeling increasingly isolated amid the corporate hierarchy's cold efficiency, Jonathan resolved that something must be done. No longer could he sit idly in boardroom meetings that celebrated bottom-line results while ignoring the very human faces behind those figures. Jonathan began to pore over internal employee surveys, time logs, and expense reports with a renewed sense of urgency, seeking patterns that might explain why many hardworking individuals seemed resigned to enduring exhaustion and compromise. What he discovered was unsettling. While the company's customer-facing image was polished and vibrant, the internal reality was fraught with records of employees clocking 16-plus-hour shifts, racking up overtime without any corresponding recognition. And, as he had seen firsthand with Sofia, many of these efforts were rewarded not with a bonus, but with a meager allowance of unpaid leftovers. The revelations sparked a crisis of conscience. Jonathan recalled how, during the stirring observation of Sofia's life, he realized that her modest request for the leftovers was not born out of gratitude, but out of necessity, a silent cry for a fairer share of the fruits her relentless labor had reaped. It became painfully clear that the company, in its pursuit of scaling profits and enhancing its market position, had unwittingly constructed an environment where the basic dignity of its most essential workers was all too often sacrificed on the altar of efficiency. The very ethos of the company, he was forced to admit, had become skewed, prioritizing profit margins over people. That very afternoon, Jonathan summoned a meeting with his top management team, a gathering that would prove to be a watershed moment for the organization. In the conference room, with its high ceilings and contemporary art adorning the walls, he spoke candidly. "We have built a successful business," he began, his tone both somber and resolute. "But I fear that in our pursuit of excellence, we have forgotten that our greatest assets are the people who work for us. The evidence from our own kitchens and back offices tells me that many of you are pushing yourselves to the limit without adequate support. This isn't sustainable, and it isn't right." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Jonathan showed the management team a series of anonymized reports and even shared some observations from his recent, unauthorized visit to monitor an employee's journey home. While some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, it was clear that his message was resonating. An uncomfortable truth laid bare for all to see. "We must change our culture," Jonathan continued. "We must start by listening to the people who have been quietly keeping our business alive." Sofia's story is not an isolated case. It is the story of countless hardworking employees who, day in and day out, give everything they have for this company. It is time we redefine what success looks like, not just in terms of revenue, but in the well-being of our workforce. The management team, initially skeptical about disrupting long-established norms, found themselves forced to confront the reality of their employees' suffering. Ideas that had once been considered too radical began to surface, introducing more balanced work shifts, offering support programs for overstretched staff, even establishing an internal committee tasked with fostering a culture of openness and fairness. Jonathan's impassioned speech, fueled by first-hand observations of a life marked by sacrifice, ignited a spark in the room. By the time the meeting adjourned, the seeds for a transformational policy shift had been sown. That same day, Jonathan took a decisive step further. He arranged for an emergency town hall meeting, inviting employees from every level of the organization to share their experiences and ideas for improvement. In a crowded auditorium filled with anxious, hopeful faces, employees spoke openly of their long hours, their struggles to balance work and family, and their unspoken fears that their contributions were being taken for granted. Among these voices, Sofia's legacy shone brightly, even if she herself remained largely unknown to her corporate superiors until now. Her silent sacrifice had become a rallying cry for change. By the end of the meeting, something remarkable had begun to take shape. Jonathan pledged that the company's policies would be overhauled to better support the workers who had long been the invisible force behind its success. Promises were made to address issues of overwork, to ensure fair compensation, and to create a work environment that valued human dignity above all else. For Jonathan, this commitment was not just about improving productivity or managing public relations. It was about restoring the soul of the company and ensuring that no employee would ever again feel compelled to settle for mere scraps. In the quiet aftermath of that transformative day, as sunlight poured through the windows of the newly reformed headquarters, Jonathan sat back in his office and reflected on the journey that had led him here. The experience had radically reshaped his understanding of leadership. He now realized that true success was measured not just in profit margins, but in the well-being and fulfillment of every member of the organization. Sofia's unassuming yet profound act of asking for leftovers had been the catalyst. A single, simple act that peeled back the layers of corporate indifference to reveal the heart-wrenching reality of its foundation. Jonathan vowed that from that day forward, his company would no longer function as a machine geared solely toward profit. Instead, it would become a community that cherished and nurtured every individual. The moment had changed everything for the employees, for the company, and, most importantly, for Jonathan himself. It was a turning point where corporate values met human compassion, and where the quiet persistence of one dedicated employee had sparked a revolution in company policy. In the hours following that transformative town hall meeting, Jonathan Hartley retreated to his private office. A room lined with books on leadership, history, and quiet inspirations, and began drafting a radical plan to reshape the company's future. He knew that the evidence of neglect, hardship, and unappreciated sacrifice exemplified by Sofia and many of her colleagues could no longer be ignored. Now was the time to translate that painful vision into concrete action, to rewrite the policies that had allowed employees to give their souls in exchange for insufficient compensation. Jonathan's heart pounded as he put pen to paper, determined to create a new blueprint for a more empathetic and supportive corporate culture. Late into the night, with only the soft hum of an all-night security system and the occasional echo from an empty hallway, Jonathan crafted a draft proposal that would shake the very foundations of the company's long-standing procedures. His memo, written in thoughtful, earnest prose, began by acknowledging the silent struggles of the unsung workers. The performance of our organization is the result of countless hours poured into every dish, every service rendered, and every act of perseverance by those in our ranks. Yet, it has become clear that our current policies have pushed these dedicated individuals to the brink, forcing them to settle for mere remnants of what their hard work should have earned. He outlined an ambitious new strategy that included rebalancing workload expectations, implementing reasonable shift regulations to prevent burnout, and mandating that every employee be accorded a protected break period for nourishment and rest. No longer would their efforts be incentivized only by production quotas. Instead, there would be a focus on holistic well-being and the dignity of every worker. The next morning, Jonathan convened a special meeting with the top executives and human resources leadership. In the spacious, sunlit conference room, he began his presentation with a calm yet impassioned tone. I recently witnessed firsthand the cost of our negligence, from the worn-out walls of Sofia's humble home to the quiet desperation in her eyes. If we continue to ignore the fundamental needs of our people, we risk crumbling under the weight of our unsustainable practices. Today, I propose that we launch a comprehensive employee dignity program. Charts and testimonials punctuated his slides, and Jonathan detailed policy changes that included guaranteed meal breaks with nutritious options, a thoughtful redesign of shift lengths to ensure a work-life balance, and the establishment of an employee wellness fund, earmarked for mental health support, childcare assistance, and financial incentives for those who had long been sacrificing personal well-being for the sake of work. He proposed that every department should have a dedicated wellness advocate, a confidential point of contact for staff to share their challenges without fear of reprisal. Additionally, a new internal committee would be created to routinely assess working conditions and the overall morale within the company. No more silent suffering, he declared. Our employees deserve to be heard, supported, and rewarded, not just with a paycheck, but with measurable care and respect. The room filled with murmurs of agreement as senior managers exchanged glances. Some were initially taken aback by the boldness of Jonathan's vision, but they soon recognized that such transformative steps were not only ethically right, but could also boost morale and productivity in the long run. Over the course of the following weeks, Jonathan worked tirelessly with HR to refine the details of his new policies. Meetings were held with team leaders across various locations, and small focus groups were organized where frontline employees, those who, like Sofia, toiled long hours without complaint, were invited to speak candidly about their conditions. In these heartfelt sessions, employees recounted tales of missed family dinners, skipped breaks, and the simple yet profound request for leftover food that had once seemed insignificant. Their voices, once muffled by exhaustion, now joined in a chorus that demanded recognition and change. Jonathan listened, often with tears glistening at the edge of his eyes, as workers described how their best efforts were overshadowed by their inability to feed their families or care for themselves properly after grueling 16-hour shifts. The resulting policy adjustments were radical and swift. The company announced that effective immediately, all employees would receive not only a significant revision to their hourly wages and overtime rates but also access to subsidized meal programs during shifts, including freshly prepared meals rather than the stale leftovers of old practice. New scheduling software was rolled out to ensure that no employee would be consistently assigned back-to-back 16-hour days without the opportunity to recuperate. Additionally, a bonus system was designed to reward teams that demonstrated not just high productivity, but also adherence to safe workspace conditions and employee wellness metrics. Jonathan's vision was clear. Success was not measured solely in quarterly profits, but in the well-being of the people behind every dish served and every customer satisfied. News about these sweeping changes spread like wildfire within the company. In briefings and internal communications, the words "employee first" and "dignity" were repeated with reverence. For many employees, the new policies signaled the beginning of a long-overdue reckoning, a promise that their daily sacrifices would be recognized and that their voices, once suppressed, now held tangible weight. The change was celebrated not only as a corporate reformation but as a moral victory in a business landscape often criticized for its disregard for worker welfare. Among the many who benefited, Sofia received a quiet phone call from HR the very next day, informing her of the new meal provisions, shorter shifts, and the introduction of regular breaks. She was offered counseling services for financial planning and access to family support programs. While the call was gentle and understandably filled with cautious optimism, it marked the first time in years that Sofia felt seen beyond her role as a tireless worker. In her simple, unassuming voice, she whispered, "Thank you," and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her sacrifices would be met with the dignity they truly deserved. Later, Jonathan issued a heartfelt open letter to the entire company broadcast via the internal newsletter. In it, he recounted his recent journey, the revelations from his secret observation, and his newfound understanding that thriving as a business was inseparable from taking care of its people. When we begin to truly value our employees, as individuals and as the foundation of our success, we begin to change the world from the inside out, he wrote. This is more than a policy change, it is a commitment to humanity. Let's build a company that our future generations will be proud of. As the day wore on into an atmosphere of cautious hope, the offices and kitchens buzzed with renewed energy, a sense that perhaps the company's future could be different from the past. The turning of this vast corporate tide was not the result of a single decision but of a cascade of heartfelt changes, anchored by a single, quietly persistent employee whose life and sacrifices had forced a transformation from top to bottom. In the weeks following the sweeping policy changes, the atmosphere within the company began to transform in ways that reverberated far beyond the polished corridors of the headquarters. At first, the changes were subtle, a quieter murmur among the kitchen staff, a newfound openness in staff meetings, and a genuine sense of relief sparked by the promise of balanced work shifts. But as time passed, these small shifts accumulated into a profound cultural evolution that touched every level of the organization. Sofia, once an unseen cornerstone of the restaurant's success with her humble request for leftovers, now found herself at the center of a new narrative. The revised initiatives had not only improved her immediate working conditions, shorter shifts, nutritious meals provided during work hours, and scheduled breaks, but had also brought long-awaited acknowledgement of the sacrifices that had defined her life for far too long. Her daily struggles, once relegated to the margins, were now recognized as emblematic of a larger issue that the company was committed to addressing. For the first time, when Sofia entered the bustling kitchen in the morning, her colleagues greeted her with smiles of recognition and understanding instead of pity or silent admiration. In the break room, where she had once sat quietly in solitude, she now overheard discussions among her peers about expanded family support programs and new wellness initiatives that promised to provide a better quality of life for everyone on the front lines. Meanwhile, Jonathan Hartley, the CEO whose eyes had been opened by his clandestine observation of Sofia's life, continued his mission of reinvention with an unwavering resolve. His daily schedule, once consumed by board meetings and quarterly reports, now included regular walkthroughs of the restaurant floor and unscheduled visits to various staff breakrooms and common areas. He wanted to hear firsthand the stories, concerns, and aspirations of his employees. During one such visit, he walked into the kitchen as the team was preparing for a busy lunch service and stopped to speak with a veteran cook, who tearfully described the financial strain of working overtime for meager pay. Jonathan listened intently, promising not only immediate measures in response to their concerns, but also a longer-term commitment to establishing a more humane, supportive work environment. The company's new employee dignity program swiftly became a rallying point for enthusiastic participation throughout the organization. With a dedicated internal committee convened to oversee continual improvements, regular surveys replaced secret complaints, and wellness advocates at every location began to make a tangible difference. Employees felt more empowered than ever before. Many began sharing their personal testimonies at town hall meetings, accounts that painted candid pictures of long hours, family sacrifices, and quiet perseverance. These stories, once locked away in inconspicuous lunchboxes and hushed whispers, were now celebrated as part of the company's proud heritage of hardworking individuals. In the wake of these revelations, the leadership not only resolved to maintain the new policy changes, but to expand them further. Plans were drawn to offer subsidized childcare, enhanced medical benefits, and even scholarship programs to help employees further their education and personal development. It was clear that no longer would the company's success be measured solely in profit margins, but rather in the holistic well-being of its people. At the heart of this sweeping change was a fundamental shift in perspective. Jonathan Hartley, who had once prided himself on his business acumen and bottom-line strategies, now found himself transformed by the simple, unyielding spirit of one dedicated woman. His interactions with Sofia, and indeed with every employee who had lent their voice to the call for dignity, had revealed that true leadership meant embracing vulnerability, acknowledging sacrifice, and investing wholeheartedly in the welfare of those who made success possible. Boardroom decisions began to reflect these priorities. Instead of focusing exclusively on quarterly earnings, company meetings now featured roundtables on employee satisfaction, community involvement, and sustainable work practices. The new policies were not just a set of rules to be followed. They were the embodiment of a philosophy that respected human effort as the greatest asset of any enterprise. The results of these changes soon became undeniable. Morale soared, employee turnover plummeted, and, interestingly, the overall performance of the restaurant chain began to flourish in ways that financial reports alone could not capture. The renewed energy imbued in each department translated into unprecedented levels of refinement in every aspect of the business. From the quality of the meals served to an enhanced customer service experience that resonated with authenticity and care. Sofia, once considered just another employee, became a symbol of hope and resilience. Her quiet perseverance had sparked a corporate revolution that redefined how success could be measured, not by numbers on a page, but by the enrichment of lives touched by genuine compassion and respect. As months passed and the profound impact of the new policies radiated throughout the company, Jonathan Hartley found himself increasingly called upon to speak about the transformation. In interviews with industry magazines and at conferences, he recounted the journey that began with a solitary observation of a woman's modest request and led to a complete overhaul of the company's values. His words, laden with sincerity and reflective wisdom, resonated widely and spurred other organizations to re-examine how they treated their employees. a chain reaction promising to gradually recalibrate an industry long steeped in the pressures of relentless competition. In the hum of everyday life at the restaurant, where the aroma of freshly prepared meals mingled with the warm chatter of contented workers, and the rhythmic clatter of pots was now interspersed with genuine laughter and meaningful dialogue, the face of change was undeniable. Sofia's sacrifices had finally been recognized, her struggles transformed into a clarion call to action for everyone responsible for the good of the company. She represented the countless unsung heroes whose daily perseverance had built the foundation of success, now celebrated and safeguarded by a leadership that had learned, in the most humble of ways, to care deeply for its people. This was the moment that changed everything. And when the CEO finally saw the truth, he could no longer keep his eyes closed to the struggles of his employees. Subscribe to the channel to see how one simple act can change the world for the better.